Welcome back to Danny Rants. Today we have a special guest. Like every week we have a special guest. This week across from me we have a touring agent, a promoter, a Revolver resident and a philanthropist for the first time. Mr. Mike Toad, how are you?
Danny, what a big up, what an introduction, man. I'm going to pay you for that.
Everyone always gives me credit for their intros. They love them.
Mate, they're brilliant. They're brilliant. I think that intro was better than the first one you gave me. Like how many years ago? Like I was one of the original Danny Grant on the Green Room hosts. I was one of the first 10. So yeah,
I think it was 7 years ago. I was just talking about it before. I can't even listen back to it because I'm so bad at it. Then yeah, everyone's going to start somewhere though, right?
Yeah. Who else from that era have you had back on?
Oh, actually, I had Kyle and I had Orchestrated. So they've came on and they've done it too. So you're the third guest from the returning first 10-part season that I did.
Big boots to fill, mate.
This should be easy.
Yeah.
So Mike, for those that don't know, can you give us a little bit of an overview of who Irish Mike is?
Who Irish Mike is, right. I am the owner, operator of Thieves, touring and events company. Started in 2009, came to Australia in 2003, ended up getting a job in a record shop. With Central Station Records, along with DJ Jeanette, who's like an absolute legend in the scene, and Andy Frost, and a guy called Jimmy, and worked in the record shop for about 4 or 5 years. And then we were doing some touring and some events. And then 2009, went out and started up Thieves myself. And yeah, I've been going 15 years now. I'm like yourself, Danny. It was like, I don't think I would know what to do if I didn't have the career I've got now, but yeah.
So winding back that, like you're obviously living in Ireland and you come, like there's this question I want to ask you firstly is why the fuck is there so many Irish people in the Australian dance music scene?
Because we got weather in Ireland, like what it's like out there today. No, but yeah, I mean, I think it's become almost like a rite of passage for people, Irish people. You know, we get the 1 year work and holiday visa. Like me, I mean, I'm not joking, bro. Like when I flew into Melbourne, I didn't really know anything about it. And I remember coming off the airplane and putting my foot on the tarmac in Melbourne going, I'm going to love it here. I hadn't even been into the city, hadn't done anything. And then, you know, that first weekend, I had a friend of a friend who I didn't know or I'd never met before. And my friend connected me with him. And this guy invited me around to a barbecue at his house on Friday evening. And we ended up in Revolver. And that was it. Like, I was just like, I know I'm going to be here for the next 20 years of my life.
Because there's a lot of guys like there's like yourself, there's Stu Belfort, there's Damon Walsh, like the list goes on of guys who work. John Hanlon are guys who have come here. So before you're in Australia, living in Melbourne, which is obviously, how old were you when you moved to Melbourne?
I was 26.
26.
Yeah.
So prior to that, you're in Ireland. What are you doing there?
So I grew up in Ireland. I was there till I was 18. And then I went to university in Glasgow. So I was there from I was 18 to I was 26. And then I came out here and I was supposed to be here like on a 1 year work and holiday visa and just, you know, got to Melbourne. When I came here in the first year, I'd said to myself that I wanted to do 5 months in Melbourne, 5 months in Sydney, 2 months traveling around Australia and then go back home. I did 6 months in Melbourne. I thought I better give Sydney a crack. Headed up to Sydney, just didn't really vibe it. First bus back to Melbourne and then that was me. I was stuck here.
So what were you doing in Glasgow when you were at school?
I did a undergraduate degree in applied chemistry and then I did a postgraduate in software engineering. And I actually heard you talking on one of your pods about how many engineers end up in the music industry. Who were you talking to?
Dude, there's Mango, Ryan Haynes, like there's
the Dangerous Goods guys.
Dangerous Goods, yeah, them guys. There's so many fucking engineers.
What is it about the engineers that we all end up? Yeah.
I have no idea. Like it's so strange. But like if anyone has a university degree and they work in the music industry, there's some form of network, civil, there's some form of engineer. I am not one of those people.
Yeah, totally.
So you come over here, no intention to work in the music industry. How do you fall into it?
Yeah. So me and a couple of mates, we were living together in Glasgow and we were just like, you know, young, going out clubbing all the time. We had decks in the house and started DJing just for fun. Started running a few parties back in Glasgow. Probably in the year and a half or 2 years before I came out, we did a couple of boat parties and it was more just like to get our crew together. But when I was coming out to Australia, somebody said to me, you know, you should bring a bag of records out because the music scene's really hopping. So I brought a bag of records with me. Ended up like just coming out here, going out clubbing on the weekends and then ending up at after parties and playing. And we used to go to Revolver to see Boogs every Sunday morning. And then I remember one particular day we left Revolver and we went to this after party at Docklands after Boogs finished on a Sunday morning. And then about 2 hours later, Boogs walked in and like I was playing at the time And I got quite nervous, and Boogs rocks over and goes, hey, do you mind if I throw on a few records? And me and him just jammed back to back for like 5 or 6 hours that day. And it was awesome, like really hit it off. And, you know, Boogs my bro now. I'm actually his manager. But yeah, we just hit it off really well. And then Boogs goes like, dude, why don't you come down and play in Revolver someday? And I was like, play at Revolver? Are you fucking serious? So like, yeah, just gathered I was playing with a Norwegian guy at the time called Håkon, and we just gathered a massive crew, and we did 3 to 7 one Sunday afternoon. And like, it went so well that they offered us another couple of dates. And then that ended up becoming like a kind of monthly residency. And then I got offered a weekly residency before Boogs on the Sunday morning. Sorry, no, I think it was like monthly before Boogs on the Sunday morning. And then I think it was 2005, the Sunday afternoons, they decided that they wanted something permanent in there. So they had Boogs in the morning, Spacey early afternoon, and then it was guests. But then I ended up getting the 3 to 7 slot in the afternoon. And it was, I did that for like from 2005 to 2018. So it was a pretty good stint. I then cut back to once a month because I was just so busy with the touring and event stuff. But in that first year, towards the end of the year, I'd ended up getting a job in a record shop. And the owner of the shop just said to me, hey, look, you know, you like working here. We like having you here. Are you interested in staying on? And I was just like, he said, like, I'll sponsor you. So I was like, yeah, I'll give this a crack. I'll stay in Australia for another couple of years and see what happens. And then the record shop, that guy ended up getting quite sick. So me and Jimmy and Jeanette and Frosty ended up taking over the store for him, and we had it for like 4 or 5 years. And then, yeah, we started running tours and events. I got my permanent residency, and I just kind of decided I want to go out and do my own thing. So yeah, I set up Thick as Thieves in 2009.
So that record shop you owned, it wasn't called Central Station. I know when you bought it was called Central Station. What did it go on to become called?
It was called Here Now. And it was like, yeah, it was like, yes, sounds arrogant saying this, but it was the place to be, the record shop to be between probably 2005 and 2008. After that, like once 2008 kicked in, like that's when Beatport launched, and like iTunes and record sales just fell through the floor. So I kind of was like, I guess I saw the writing on the wall a bit for record stores then. And, you know, the other guys, they wanted to keep the vinyl store open, but our record order had gone from 3,000 to 300 a week in a space of about 6 months. So yeah, I just decided I didn't see a future in the retail store, and I just kind of wanted to get out and just focus on touring and events. And yeah, that's what I did.
So where was that store? I remember, I obviously know that it was called Here Now, but like where was that store for those that don't know?
Little Burke Street, just in the city above, it's actually a barber shop now. But yeah, it was such a special place in my heart, Danny, because like, you know, at the time, Frosty and Jeanette, like they, you know, Jeanette's still on fire, but Frosty and Jeanette were really like prominent DJs in Melbourne. So, you know, everybody was playing vinyl at that stage. So every single touring DJ that was coming to Melbourne was coming into our store on a Friday evening, you know, and it was this massive community. And yeah, it was just really good vibe and really gave me, I'd say, the foundation for my music career in Melbourne.
Because Central Station, before you guys owned it, that's like, you know, it continues to come up in my podcast for people talking about it from the early 90s into the 2000s. You guys take it on. You talk about being a resident Revolver. What kind of music were you playing back then?
It was mostly like electro and house stuff. I mean, you know, that we were talking about before we came on air, that sound was so big, like T-Rec and, you know, like Ajax and all that kind of stuff, you know, all the French stuff, like that was really big at the time, like the Ed Banger stuff. I mean, I didn't play so much of that, but it was just, I mean, to be honest, like Boogs kind of led the sound at that period, you know, and everybody, I felt like what most people were doing was like offshoots of what Boogs was doing, you know, he was leading the charge, you know, and I mean, the Sunday mornings at Revolver were like an institution, you know, it was just on fire. You go down there on Sunday mornings and you just see everybody clamored around to see what he was doing, you know, so yeah, it was mostly like house and techno, and then, you know, like, probably little bits of everything else, but yeah, it was good fun. The
term that people use is Revs music, is what they call it.
Revs music, yeah. I mean, even still, like Revs gets, you know, like we're going over this year to Snow Machine in Japan, and we're doing like a Revs Thick as Thieves takeover, in New Zealand. And, you know, obviously you guys had Revs on at Reminisce this year, you know, it's still like, it's like such an iconic location, and it's such a huge part of the I guess the Melbourne electronic music culture, you know, like somebody told me, I think Revolver is the most Uber destination in the whole of Australia. Like, can you believe that? Like over like the Opera House and Harbour Bridge and stuff. But yeah, it's crazy. It's such an important part of what goes on here musically.
So when you first came and you start playing Revolver, obviously you start getting a job at the record shop. At that point, are you looking at going, you know, music is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, or was it just fleeting?
I think I was like, this is what I want to be doing for the next few years. I mean, if you had asked me if I was going to make a career out of it, I wouldn't have thought so, you know. But I think then it just evolved, Danny, you know, and I started touring acts and I started like building relationships with acts. And I was probably primarily a touring agent over a promoter initially. But then I met people like you and Kyle, and you know, you guys were like, Mike, why don't you do these parties with us? And remember, we did heaps of stuff together, you know. But like, yeah, I just decided then, like, you know, rather than always selling on the Melbourne shows, I was like, I'll give us a crack myself, and we started doing shows, started doing this thing called the Summer Series in Revolver on a Sunday night. And there wasn't much happening in Revolver on Sunday nights, but like it went from being like, you know, like a handful of people to like sometimes like a line down as far as like, you know, Lucky Cock for people waiting to get in when we had some of the big acts down there. So yeah, and then you know, it just kind of grew, started doing stuff outside Revolver, and you know, the shows got bigger and started teaming up with people like Untitled and doing Riva and Pikas and stuff like that there. So yeah.
When you first start, what's the first artist that you bring out? Because I remember obviously we had a lot to do in your early days.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird because you were like a bigger brother to us.
Yeah.
I know the artists were buying off you, but who was like the first guy you did, and how did you figure out how to do it?
The very first act I toured was an act called, do you remember Mowgli?
Yep, I did him at Wawa.
That's right. Yes, what you did. Yeah. We've been getting these records in the shop, and the records were all selling really well, but it was weird because, you know, it was basically, I mean, MySpace was out, but like it was kind of pre-social media. And I was like, nobody's really onto this. So I contacted him, and I said, look, you know, I'd like to bring you out to Australia and I'd like to put a tour together. I remember the tour, it was like, I was sending this guy the itinerary, and I was like, I'm flying into the wrong airports, and like driver times were all messed up. Like I made an absolute botch of it, but luckily he was cool, and the shows all went really well. And then, you know, yeah, at the end of it, I was like, right, you know, I think there's something in this. I think I could do this a bit more. And yeah, that tour was through the record shop. And I did probably 6 or 7 tours. I did Mowgli, Phil Kieran, Audio Jack, Format B. And it's funny because a lot of those guys I'm still in contact with, you know, like I still bring Audio Jack out to Australia regularly. I was actually in talks with Phil about bringing Phil back for the Reminisce show that you guys did. So yeah, it was, then I went out on my own, and I was living with my friend Jess at the time, and Jess was used coming home to me. Like I was a one-man band just with this mountain of paper everywhere, making no sense of it at all. And just me constantly complaining about how I'd fucked everything up. And then Jess just goes to me one day, get out of the way and let me handle this. And that basically became a job for Jess. So she was like the first person who worked for me and kind of steadied the ship a bit, you know, like managed to get all the organization side of things sorted. She started doing the visas, make sure everything was processed in time. And yeah, it just took off from there. And like, you know, I think the first year out on my own, I did 8 or 9 tours. And then, you know, now we're doing like 80 to 100 a year, like a bunch of events as well. So
it's crazy. As a promoter, I remember buying probably your first artist.
Yeah.
And then I remember like watching you kind of grow and get into a position where you were doing 8, you know, into 15, 20. And I was like, how's this guy making money? Like this seemed like a dream job. But at the same time, I actually do believe that without you doing those first tours, myself and Kyle never get into international artists. Because we were just doing like local shows, you know, promoting fucking club gigs.
Yeah.
And then you were like, guys, you want to do this stuff? And we were into that sound. And that progressed our journey into another level where we did a lot of stuff with you, but we also did stuff externally to you. And it took us to different levels in our own careers.
Totally.
So when you're doing touring agent, right? So you begin this journey, you sort of fumble your way through it. But for people that don't understand, can you explain exactly like how you actually do this process? Because there's a whole lot of like government tape, which no doubt, I don't know if you did at the start, but when I've done touring, we've had to sneak people into the country.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. You almost pray that the person's DJ name is not in the same as their real name if you've made a screw up with a visa, because then you can kind of get them in on a tourist visa. Well, I haven't had to do that for ages, but Yeah, look, it's basically like you approach you try and identify an artist that you think is going to work for you, and then you approach the agent and you ask the agent if you can work on the tour. You know, they might have something going on with someone else. They might have an exclusive agent in Australia already, but you approach the agent, you ask them if they're available. You know, can you put something together? Generally, with the smaller acts, they are available, and the agencies will let you work on them. And then you just reach out to all the promoters and around the country, and you try and line up so that you've got like generally 5 or 6 dates over 2 weekends. So you're doing Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and you're hitting Melbourne, Sydney, Perth, Brisbane, Adelaide, and then one of Auckland or Canberra or something like that there. So yeah, and then you go back and present an offer to the agent for the 5 or 6 shows or whatever it is. Agent's always going to say no first time you present the offer. That's their job. Then you renegotiate, you go back and forth a bit, try and get a deal locked down. And and then if you get it all locked down, like the artist, you know, announces the shows and comes out, and hopefully they all sell well, and like you don't end up losing money. But
and the permit side of stuff, like when you've got to get, like people wouldn't know, I doubt they would, but you've got to get visas and approvals for them to come work over here. As I mentioned beforehand, when you first started doing it, were you doing that?
Oh, Danny, I was like half the time applying for student visas, thinking they were work visas. They were like, you know, I mean, I had so many close calls, and you know, like I think a couple of times artists couldn't get into the country. Actually, I applied for the wrong visa for an artist. He asked me if I could put some dates together coming through Asia. So I got him a gig in China, and I got him the wrong visa, and he ended up in jail for 24 hours. And he was like, I got this SOS from his agent going like, you need to get a lawyer in China straight away. And I was like, what for? And he was like, you sent him in the wrong visa. So luckily he explained that it was my fault, and I was based in Australia, and they let him out, but he wasn't allowed to play the gig in China. And after that, I decided to leave the Asian bookings alone.
Because that's the thing, there's lots of horror stories, right? Like the amount of people that I knew early days, like when you sort of started it, it was a cowboy industry kind of.
Yeah, totally.
And the amount of times we'd booked artists and they'd get turned back because they didn't have any form of visa because no one knew.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you were kind of like one of the first guys who wasn't like a totem or, you know, ministry that was sort of independent that kind of worked it out.
Totally.
How did you work it out?
I mean, I think you just had to work it out because, you know, like, yeah, I mean, a couple of the big agencies we were dealing with would say to you, have you got the work visa sorted? And you just started looking into it. And then like, there is a whole lot of like paperwork and bureaucratic bullshit that goes along with the visa process. Like, for example, in order to get the work visa, the artist has to be paying a minimum amount of money, and then they have to pay tax on that. So like, you know, you're automatically lining yourself up for more costs by going through the proper channels, but you have to do it. Everybody does it now, you know, and the implications for not having the proper visa now outweigh the risk of, you know, trying to get them into the country and just playing on a tourist visa, you know. Like if they get caught playing on a tourist visa now, they can get like 3 or 5 year ban. So, and it can stop them getting into other countries as well. Like if you get stopped going into Australia for not having the right visa, I don't think you can get into America. So none of them are going to jeopardize, you know, like a market like America for the sake of like flying rogue in Australia, you know. But it's definitely been a learning process. Luckily, I don't do any of that now. Like my friend Jess, who I was talking about, she's got a company, and we just handball all that to her, and like, yeah, there's never really any bother.
So the logistic part of touring is by far one of the hardest things you can do, I believe, in dance music industry, right? So I had a go at it, thought it could be the dream, but I'm not organized enough. So basically, when you were doing this and in those early stages, is there like a nightmare sort of situation story that you have other than getting someone locked up in China that you can remember where everything just went fucking completely wrong?
I mean, I remember at one point we had this act coming out for like a tour. It was sold out, and they were about to leave the UK, and a fucking volcano exploded in Iceland, and all the flights got grounded, and like we had to cancel the whole thing. We had paid 100% of the fee up front. The agency kept all the money, said we weren't getting any of it back. They said, look, it's not our artist's fault. Then the promoters all here wanted a refund because they didn't get the artist, and I ended up out an absolute fortune, you know, just because this fucking volcano, you know. But yeah, I like. I mean, there's always logistics stories, you know. Like, I mean, the whole like, it makes me laugh sometimes because I had an artist last year, and they were like, you know, they basically wanted a private jet. But they had on their rider, we're going green. And it was all like glass bottles, all this like eco-friendly stuff. But then it was like a private jet, and then the jet wasn't big enough, so they needed a bigger private jet for their crew. There was like this particular type of like Mexican cola on the rider that we couldn't get in Melbourne, but we basically said, look, guys, we can't get this in Melbourne. And they said like, oh, we've found you can get it in Geelong. And I'm like, you fucking serious? You can actually, you're going green, but you want me to send a driver now? It's going to cost me like $200 for the day to go and pick up a bottle of Mexican cola. And they were like, yep, you've got to do it. So, yeah, I mean, you always get challenges with logistics and stuff like that there, but you usually work around it,
So when you first start out, again, there's these bigger groups that are around, but there's not a lot of independent. Maybe I'm wrong, but you're one of the first independent touring agents in the dance music. And we're talking when you started, it was emerging, right? So dance music had started, it was like 2005, 6, 8, whatever. It really started to like get legs, and every club was playing it. Prior to that, it was more of a niche thing.
Totally.
So you're like one of the first guys that walks in there, that becomes independent. How do you build these relationships with these artists and also to the promoters interstate?
Yeah. I mean, Danny, I remember at the time, so we were running some events through the shop, and we had bought a couple of acts off people like Future. And I remember going to pick the artist up and talking to them at dinner the night before the night of the show and saying, oh, so what do you think of Melbourne? Because I just got here. I'd been here a few years, and I was just like buzzing on how amazing Melbourne was. And I was like, the whole world needs to see this place. It's the best city in the world. And I remember like taking these guys out for dinner, and like they might have been here all week. And I'd say like, what have you been doing all week? And they were like, oh, just in the hotel. I'm like, did nobody take you out? And they were like, no, we haven't heard from anybody all week. So it was me and Boogs actually came up, like when we came up with Thick as Thieves, we just basically said, this city and this country is amazing. And these people are coming out here, spending a week at a time here, and they're not getting to experience anything because they're just stuck in the hotel room. So we said, like, let's try and change that. So, when a lot of the artists started coming out, we started like simple stuff down, taking them to Halesville Animal Sanctuary. Like, you have no idea how much loyalty seeing a German techno DJ petting a kangaroo will buy you. Like, it's like, if they can touch a kangaroo, they're coming with you for the next 20 years, So like we started bringing the artists out and spending a couple of days on their off week, taking them out to like Halesville or the Great Ocean Road or stuff like that there. And immediately the tone of those artists going back were like, A, these guys really look after us, and B, Australia's actually amazing. Let's tell our friends, let's connect them with Thick as Thieves, and hopefully it can make something happen. And it just worked, man. Like it was. I mean, we weren't doing anything that was too out of the box. We had a very simple ethos with the tours: make sure the artists have a good time, and make sure they have good shows. And like if you tick both those boxes, generally people want to come back with you. So yeah, it just worked. And every year we added more and more artists to the roster, and just became hard after a while, because there was times when I was out in Halesville Animal Sanctuary like 3 times in a week. I'm sure the zookeepers were just like, what's that weird guy doing back? Like his 3rd time this week seeing the kangaroos. But yeah, definitely the artists love it. And, we always enjoyed hanging out with the artists. And I think as well, when you go and hang out with the artists, one of the conversations I would always have is, guys, who's blowing up in Europe? So then they would feed you who the next wave of artists who are going to be big are, while you're out having a day out with them. So we just constantly kept like more and more acts coming through. We were able to sign more stuff, and yeah, just built from there.
I think that model is a testament to you guys, because you talk about Phil Kieran, you talk about these artists from back in the day, Patrick Topping, Rebuke, whatever you guys have gone on to do, but you've done them time and time again. So I think that's a really good testament to yourself and like that model. But again, you're a Revolver resident, you own a record store, you're doing some little tours here and there, but then you start selling these guys to interstate. Back then, we're talking MySpace again. You couldn't just go on Instagram and figure out who the promoters are. Even now, probably still difficult.
Yeah.
How the fuck were you getting in contact with these promoters in the first place?
Yeah, do you know what, Danny? I don't know. It was like, no, like I think word had just traveled, like, I mean, a lot of it was done over the phone, like you just found out who the promoters were in each city, and, like, and you tend, even though there's like, a million promoters, you tended to be working with the same 15 to 20 guys all the time. There's 3 or 4 guys in Sydney that you knew were always going to buy the acts. There's 3 or 4 guys, in Perth and Adelaide. And yeah, you just work out who are the good ones to work with. And, you offer them stuff first. And generally, as long as you're creating a win-win, people want to keep working with you. And just, as long as they're getting good shows at a decent price and as long as the artist's happy, I think obviously a lot of it was done via email at the start, but then when the whole social media thing kicked in, that's you can just track anything down and you don't have to go looking for the promoters. It just pops up in your feed, even when you don't want it,
Or people find you now, they know you got the app.
Yeah, exactly.
So another one you talked about when you were originally emailing people, right? And you had these people and they were saying, I'm being represented by people already in Australia. There's a lot of politics with that. So I know myself, I've emailed people and then I've had someone from another group in Australia BCC'd over the top and then it creates like a bit of a drama. Yeah. Can you walk us through the politics of that whole process and also to how you do these exclusivity deals and what they look like?
Yeah. Look, to be honest, Danny, I don't have an exclusivity deal with anybody. I don't have a piece of paper with Patrick or Rebuke or any of these guys. It's just there's just a level of trust there. They've been happy with what we've done touring wise so far in the shows. And generally it's now they just tell their European or world agents if any inquiries come in from Australia, just direct them to Mike. And that's kind of what happens, or Jacob, whoever it is. But yeah, the political thing, especially going with some of the big acts, we don't need to name names, but who there's guys that fight tooth and nail over artists.
And have for decades.
And would blow loads of their own money just so that somebody else doesn't get an act. I don't get it. I'm just if something reaches a commercial value where it's I just walk away. I'm just going to go, here, take it. That's, you have it. I'm not going to make money on that, So, but yeah, some of the political stuff, guys launching festivals on the same weekend as they know another guy's got a festival, just to put them out of business. And yeah, it's crazy.
The guys before us love it more so than the guys these days. I think we've watched the people get burnt, but
yeah.
You talked about how you're doing the Here Now parties to the record store. You're obviously working with guys like us. We started a brand called Tomorrow Never Comes. I think we did And Him. We did fucking Superflu. We did
that And Him party was crazy.
Yeah. We did. I think we did Dubfire together, which I don't think you two would, but we did that.
Yeah.
We did Patrick Topping, which is still one of my favorite shows.
I remember with the Dubfire. I remember the show didn't go exactly according to plan, and we were down money. And then I remember we got handed a bill for $1,000 for dinner, and I was just like, oh man, that was just a kick in the nuts I just didn't need after.
Yeah, I remember, I think we did 2,000 people close on.
Yeah.
And then I remember coming back with everyone's gonna chip cash in. I was like, how? How is this happening?
Totally.
Yeah, totally. One of those successes that isn't a success.
Would you believe it? I'm actually bringing out Deep Dish in November, which is one half of Dubfire's one half of really iconic, legendary act. They haven't been together for years and years. They won a Grammy in 2009 and they've reformed again. So got him coming back out for Harbour Life and a couple other shows.
Oh, I saw that when I was in Sydney. I was getting smashed with the ads.
Yeah.
So you go there, you're working with us like promoters, you're sort of co-promoting shows, and then you work into doing your own stuff, right?
Yeah.
So obviously Revolver was a bit of a platform for that, but then you go into festivals and you start doing Reva. This is in this period of, tell me if I'm wrong here, but 2016 to 2020.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have this massive growth. I know it was slowish, but you kind of go from basically selling or co-promoting to then doing festivals.
Danny, I wouldn't say it was slow. I would say it was measured. I'm very, very calculated with risk. And, as I said, I know when to walk away, but it was I'm no matter what I do in life, I'm always happy building things at a pace where, it's sustainable. And I knew at one point we were going to get the festival level doing not massive, but 5,000 to 8,000 cap events. And I always said to myself that because Melbourne really lacks venues between 1,500 and 4,000, right? And as you know, the Timber Yard's only come online in the last, 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, max.
But back in 2016, it wasn't there. So you had basically Brown Alley, Bottom End, Prince, 170, and then it was from there up to Riva or Festival Hall. There was no middle ground. But I always said before I took the jump going up to those bigger size venues, I wanted to be able to confidently do 8 or 9 sellouts across the 1,500 cap. And then when I did that, I was right, now I'm ready to step up. I had the financial backing that if it didn't work out, not backing the financial means that, I could cover myself if it didn't work out, So, it happened at the right time. And then once we did one of them, it was like a domino. We started doing like 7 or 8 a year, you know. We've kind of pulled back on that stuff now because A, there's a lot of people doing it, but B, the costs in major events now are just astronomical. Like it's, you know, I mean, you know this, like it's hard to make $1 doing like greenfield sites and stuff like that there, you know?
It's interesting because I was actually going to go down the track to this thing, but I think I'm going to do it now because it's sort of fitting, right?
Yeah.
But you're one of the guys who, like I've known you for now a good part of almost 2 decades, but you've always made calculated decisions, not ego. And like in our industry, a lot of people make ego decisions, like everybody does basically. But as you go along, you always, you won't take risks for no reason. And I remember when it all started to go to shit, and I don't know if you remember this conversation, but you said to me, we're going to step back. We're going to making more money from club shows than we are going to from festivals. I understand that everyone wants to do 5,000-6,000 because it looks good online, but like I'm not playing that game. Like it's getting too aggressive. So you were very much calculated, and you sort of, I get ego in a sense because a lot of people died on that hill.
Yeah.
And you went back. Can you kind of run through the fact, like, can you kind of run through how and why you made that decision as you were doing sort of 6,000 to 8,000 people festivals 10 times a year? Why you guys decided to revert back and take a step back into more club shows?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Danny, like one of the quotes I live by is like, ego is the enemy of outcome. And like, it's so true. Like people get so caught up with their ego and trying to just like be bigger and, you know, have the biggest show and have the most production and stuff. But like we actually did a couple of shows coming out of COVID. And it was at that time period when the cost just went through the roof. And a couple of the shows, like if we had done those shows pre-COVID, they would have made good money. And one of them, we did like 3,500 people and like we lost a bit of money on it. And I was going like, how does this happen? And then there was another show we did where we did just over 4,000, and the show made like a tiny bit of money, but it was outdoors at Riva. It was like the week of the show, we had amazing weather and we sold 800 tickets that week of the show because the weather was really good. And I just sat back and went, if we hadn't had good weather, this was like, we were in the red here. And like, you know, as much as it's great to be doing those big shows, unless you absolutely know that the artist is a home run, it's like you're putting yourself under such massive pressure and such massive stress to try and break even, you know, and like, you know, I just figured out that like, it's much safer to do smaller cap venues and do a lot of them. You're not going to make the same amount of money if it goes really well, but you're definitely not going to lose the same amount of money. And you're actually probably not going to lose money on a smaller cap venue if you've got a decent profile artist. So,
but you can also pull back costs. Like when you're talking to greenfields, you have to have a certain amount of toilets. You have to have a certain amount of staging, lighting, whatever it is. Like if you're in a venue, you're able to like really rip it back. So like if you're talking your 200 under cap, like on tickets or whatever, you're able to sort of start to amend that to get that down to 20. So your loss could be $1,000 or $5,000.
Absolutely.
When you're talking a fucking festival, you can lose 100,000.
6 figures, easy.
Yeah, and so I think everybody we know has done
it. We did one event that we took a pretty big kick in the nuts on. And that was the pivotal moment where I went like, you know, one of those ones where you're walking out the end of the event, you're looking at the P&L like going, what the fuck? And then everybody's clapping you in the back, telling you how amazing the event was. You're just like, I'm too old in the tooth for this, you know?
But you're not a promoter if that hasn't happened.
Danny.
You walk out and everyone's like, dude, you fucking killed it. You must be buying a mansion. You're like looking at the P&L going, I'm going to lose my house.
You're like, can I borrow money for an Uber to get home? But Danny, on that note of losing your house, I mean, this happens every year. And like, there's promoters. I mean, I know this happened with these guys doing a national run a few years ago. There was these guys and they had an event in a regional city and it went really well. And they did it the second year, they did 2 regional cities and it went really well. And then they decided to go all in and take this festival national and like do 5 regional cities. And one of the guys owned 2 cafes and a house and he had 2 kids, right? And he remortgaged the whole thing and put it on to fund this festival, and the festival tanked. He lost his house. He lost 2 good businesses. And I just sit there going like, you know, you had kids, mate. Like, in what world, like, why did you feel the need to jeopardize the roof over their heads? Like, to roll it on a music festival? Like for what? For, you know, like, for your egos to say you've run a music festival? Is that what, like, is that the cost of what you do? And it's happening this year again with certain festivals. People are just going all in and mortgaging themselves up to the hilt. Like I know people that are doing this, and I just look going, man, what are you thinking? Like if this doesn't work out, like what's your backup?
What's the craziest part about it, as you say that, right? Anyone listening to this is going to be like, that's completely sensible. Why would anyone do this? But you are an outlier in our world. And like I myself have actually had the same realization, but still made that mistake.
Yeah.
So I remember doing stuff when we were doing internationals and we were doing festival shows, like more sort of 5,000 to 7,000. Going, we're making 10 grand and we're doing these club shows and making 30, right?
Yeah.
So we went back and did heaps of club shows, but then you kind of get wrapped up in it and you see others doing it, you're like, fuck, I want to participate in this game. You get that big loss, it kills you. But it's like, it's one of these things, it's an age-old thing. And I guess that's why I started defending festival promoters in the first place, because I was like, these guys are passionate idiots in a sense.
Yeah.
They're not these multimillionaire genius entrepreneurs that you think. So that's why I wanted to highlight that.
I think, Danny, like, if you've got like, if you've made loads of money over the years, you've got the back and say public knowledge, Richie, right? He did very well, did a big sale, Stereosonic. He can afford to take risk like that. But if you're a guy that's like just got a small business and you're paying off a mortgage, I mean, don't put the whole thing on a fucking music festival. Like it's
you're better off going to Crown and putting your money on black.
Yeah, totally. You actually would. I swear, Danny, I was chatting to somebody about this morning. See camping festivals. Literally every single camping festival has some form of a catastrophic disaster once every 4 years. I mean, look at Pitch, obviously what happened last year, like Lost Paradise, the ticketing debacle this year, Strawberry Fields flooded 2-3 years ago. Rainbow Serpent done because of the heat. Return to Rio flooded 2 years ago. Now you can't get a permit. Like anybody goes into these camping festivals thinking, I'm going to make money at this, has got rocks in their head. It's literally like, I mean, all you do is look at the history, like, and the weather in Australia is changing. It's like, I don't know, not for me, man.
It was a good little offshoot of the conversation.
Totally.
So winding back to it, when you first start, a lot of these guys that you mentioned early on, they go on to become some of the biggest artists in their areas. Like guys like Clapton, Patrick Topping. The first Patrick Topping show we did together was at Revolver, and I don't think we sold it out. It was like, we maybe did 200 tickets.
Danny, I remember, like, I mean, I had talked you and Kyle I was like, guys, this guy is really good. And you were like, yeah, fucking let's do it. I think that was like when we were all young and carefree. You were like, yeah, sounds good, But I remember that first tour, I brought Patrick out, and for 3 shows, his landed fee for all 3 shows was $4,500. Like, and then obviously he came out, loved Revolver, like had a great show there.
He did a few hours there that night, I think.
And then he went back the following year and he had his first big record, Forget. So when he came back out the next year, there was a lot more vibe and he wanted to play longer. And it became this thing where he kept coming to Revolver and extending his set. It went 6 hours to 8 hours. And then I can't remember if he did 10 or 12. But he did a couple of really long ones in there. But then those artists globally have just grown. And obviously, because I'm their agent, and because me and Patrick are really tight friends, we message each other like every second day about health stuff and training and that now, so like, it's just like as the artists have grown globally, we've been along for the ride, and it's worked really well for both of us,
Who are some of those artists that you've worked with that have gone on to be like, the ones I was talking about?
I mean, look, Patrick, Purple Disco Machine's massive now. Clapton, obviously, Rebuke's doing really well. There's heaps. Township Rebellion. Sebastian Leger. Yeah, we did actually. Sebastian Leger, I remember we did a show with him in Brown Alley. I think it was 2014 or 2015, and at the time, Torrin and Nick Kennedy and Luke were promoting something else, and they said, do you want to team up and do something together? And we were like, yeah. And they were like, oh, we've got this graphic designer, this young guy, Dom. And we said, yeah, we'll let Dom do the art. So they came back to us and they were like, what are we going to call the party? And I was like, you guys come up with something. To this day, Danny, is probably like the worst name for a party. I don't know how this one slipped through the cracks, but we ended up calling this party Circle Jerk.
I actually remember this. I can see the logo.
And I was just like, how did none of us twig that there? Like, needless to say, that was a one and done. But I'm blaming Dom for that one.
So you talked about disasters, right? I know there was one where you had Clapton at Reva and there was a private jet story of you trying to get in. Can you tell me that story?
Yeah, well, Yeah, and so Clapton played at Harbour Life Festival during the day in Sydney, and then he was playing a headline show at Riva that night. And the only way we could get him between Harbour Life and Riva in time was to get a private jet. And I hadn't been on a private jet before, so I was like, man, this is going to be fantastic. This is the life. So I was up in Sydney with him during the day, and then as soon as he finished playing, we like jumped in this car and raced off to Bankstown Airport and came out, and like I was waiting for this, like, you know, something you'd see like Bill Gates or Elon Musk in, and it was basically like a can of sardines with two wings on it, you know. And we got in this jet, and the weather was really bad, and it was hailstoning coming into Melbourne in November. Like November's usually a home run with the weather, but we actually I remember we went to come down the jet, and the guy was like basically like, I can't land this thing. It's too rough. And I was like, mate, you've got to get this thing down. Like we're doing like he's supposed to be on in half an hour. And the guy just turns to me and goes, all right, boy, strap in. What I'm about to do is highly illegal. And he went down, and it was just like sitting inside a washing machine, bro. It was just like boom, 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 boom. And luckily we made it down, got in the car, and like he made it to the venue. He was 5 minutes late, but nobody bat an eyelid. But yeah, the private jet, it was all a big illusion from what you see on Instagram. And it was, if I don't get back in another one, I won't be too disappointed.
Were you shitting your pants?
Oh man, I was shitting it. Yeah, we were. And Clapton was kind of like, he was just taking it all in a stride. He was just like, yeah, this is what it's like every time, you know? So.
So on that, you've been with artists on tour all over Australia. Is there like a one standout sort of tour story that you can share with us that comes to mind?
Yeah, I remember at one point, so you know the artist Christoph?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Christoph's he's a good mate of ours. He's a fucking funny fucker, and he's a loose unit. But Chris was coming in to do a tour, and he was playing in Melbourne at Revolver on the Friday night, and it was the Friday night of Grand Prix weekend, and he was flying in on Thursday, and he didn't book his accommodation until like 2 days before. So then he messages me going, hey dude, I've just tried to book a hotel. There's like nothing in Melbourne. And I was like, you're only booking it now, man? And he was like, yeah, oh man, I'm a bit of a useless fucker, you know, like, so he basically, I said, look, Chris, like my flatmate's away. You can crash in the other room. And he's like, oh, nice one. So he was arriving in on the Thursday evening. The show was on Friday. And he got to the airport, and he was in an Uber out to Mayan. I was living in Windsor at the time. And as he was in the Uber, my dog got stung by a wasp, and its neck started to swell up. So I called him, and I was just like, hey, mate, I've got to take my dog to the vet straight away. I'll leave a key under the mat for you. So anyway, I went up to the vet, got my dog sorted, probably took about 2.5 hours. And then I came back down to the house, and Christoph's bag was in the room, but there was no sign of him. So I messaged him, and I was like, hey, where are you? Are you coming back, or what's the story? And he was like, oh, I just headed out to the pub. I've just bumped into a mate of yours, some guy called Sean. And I was like, Sean who? And he's like, is his second name Ralt? And I was like, oh no, this isn't going to end well. And then like the next day, like I woke up the next morning, like 10 o'clock, Christoph's bag was still lying in the same place. I was like, oh man. And then it got to about 4 p.m. and he was playing at like 9 p.m. that night. And he wasn't picking up the phone. And I was like, where the fuck is he? So I put a message out on Facebook saying, hey, has anybody seen Christoph? He was last spotted with Sean Ralt at this pub. And somebody replied and basically said that he had left this apartment at 12 o'clock and there was some chick blowing rack up his arse at that stage.
Oh my God, that is so good.
And I was like, no. And I was like, where did he go? And they said like, I think he went back to Sean's. And anyway, I managed to get a hold of Sean. They sent him home. He had a shower at like 8 p.m. and he was on the decks at 9. But yeah, stressful moment, but we got him there in the end.
This is such a funny thing because it's like there's also promoters and DJs in Melbourne, not including internationals, where it's not uncommon for that to come up where there's someone like, hey, has anyone spotted this guy? And then like the alumni of our industry comes through and goes, yeah, he was at this person's apartment at 3 p.m. and we can kind of piece it back together and figure out where they kicked onto.
Totally. Sean actually, that story popped up on it's popped up on his Facebook memories the other day, and he was like, fuck, do you remember this? And I was like, how can I forget, man?
But when you talk about those logistical nightmares, right? When you're dealing with DJs, that's probably not the most uncommon story. I know things are changing now.
Nah.
How do you deal with moving these guys around and making sure that they are on time all the time? Is that like a bit of a hassle?
Do you know what, Danny? It used to be, I would say pre-COVID, it used to be a lot worse. I was actually talking to an agent last week about, he wanted me to bring out this act, and I had brought the act out in 2018 or something, and this guy played a show in Melbourne on the Friday night and got so fucked up that was so hungover. He was playing in Perth on Saturday, had the driver pick him up on the morning, take him to the airport, but then just couldn't face the flight. So checked himself into the airport hotel in Melbourne and then just turned his phone off. So the promoter from Perth was messaging me going, hey dude, like 5 hours later, our driver's walking around the airport. We can't find this guy. And I was like, well, I've spoken to the driver. He dropped him off at the airport. And then we had to check with the airline if he made the flight. And they were like, no, he didn't make the flight. He wasn't on the flight. And I was like, what's happened between the airport? And then I just thought, I'll phone the airport hotel, like the Park Royal. And I said, excuse me, can you put me through to this guy's room? And they said, yeah, hang on, we'll connect you. And I was like, and then I literally was like, what the fuck are you doing, dude? And he was like, oh, Mike, I'm so sorry, man. I couldn't face it. And I was like, man, the promoter's got a sold out venue. And he's just like, and he hung up on me. And I was just like, I'm done. Like, that's just one-way ticket back home, man, you know? So
what, if they're too hard to deal with, you just don't work with them again?
Danny, honestly, I'm at the stage where, yeah, like I just don't need to be, I only want to work with people who are good to work with, promoters, agents, you name it, you know, like, I mean, life's short and, you know, you just don't need the stress. And to be honest, since we've come out of COVID, way more of the DJs are like not drinking or sober. So we haven't really had those issues, you know, like it used to crop up every second weekend before COVID, but now it's like, all the guys are like super straight. And like I would say, I'm not joking, bro. I would say 50% of the drink riders now are alcohol free. Yeah.
It goes into this next segue, right? Because like pre-2000 or COVID, even like 2018 to that, but those years, DJs were wild. Like it was unusual. They would kick on. You know, we would go do a show and then people would go out for days with them afterwards. That was a common story. It was almost like expected of them in a sense. Yeah. These days, you're more likely to see a protein shake than you are to see a bottle of vodka on a rider.
Totally.
You yourself are one of those guys who sort of heroed that, especially in Australia or Melbourne, probably Australia actually. You go on to start up this thing called Quick as Thieves. Yeah. You know, it starts off as a little kind of like a personal journey for yourself, and then you end up raising millions and millions of dollars for Fred Hollows. Can you walk us through how that began and how it got to where the point it did, and how much did you raise? Yeah,
well, currently we've raised 2.5 million. It started, Danny, like I had this one incident. I don't know if we spoke about this in the last pod, but like when I was at college, so I spent a year at college after secondary school in Ireland. And I remember I was walking around college one day, and there was a guy at our college was like an albino, you know, so like white hair and like really, really impaired vision. And there was like a floating staircase in the college, and this guy was walking to class. So, you know, like the staircase you see in the middle of a prison landing, it was like from the middle of the floor. And he was walking really fast and didn't see the staircase, and he smashed his head on it, and he fell, and his books fell out. And there was these other dudes, and they started laughing at him. And like I went over and I helped him pick up his bags and his books, and like he had cut his head. And I remember going like, fuck, dude, are you all right? And he was just like, oh. And I remember he said this thing, he said like, oh, shit like this happens to me all the time. And I went home that evening, Danny, and it absolutely broke me, man. I got really emotional by it. And I said to myself there and then that like, if I was ever in the position to help people with impaired vision, I was going to try and do it. So when I set up Thick as Thieves, I said to myself, one of the foundations of the company was going to be we were going to always try and raise money for people with impaired vision. So I started running music events for the guide dogs, and we did that for like a year. And then I was literally driving down Punt Road one day, and I saw this huge sign saying $25 to restore the gift of sight, and I was like, what is that? And saw there was a website, Fred Hollows, and started looking into it. Fred Hollows is this amazing charity organization that goes into third world countries, and people that are blinded by cataracts disease, people can be completely blind and they can restore their vision for $25. So, you know, with the guide dogs, it costs 40 grand to train one guide dog. And I was like, well, this is so much more bang for your buck, you know? So I walked up to the Fred Hollows office and I just said, look, excuse me, you know, I own this music company and, you know, we want to try and give back a bit. I'd like to raise some money for you. And they said, like, how are you going to do it? And I was like, well, I run these dance parties at Revolver. Unbeknownst to me, they were like, when I walked out of the office, they were just like, hey, we've just had some fucking fruitcake come in banging on about like raising money and whatever else. But I started running events at Revolver for charity. So what we would do is, say, Patrick, Clapton, Colsh, Sonny Fodera, a lot of the big acts that I was bringing out, the normal protocol at the time by a touring agent or event company was if you do a show and it sells out, you then add another show and everybody makes more money. But I just took the ethos, like, if we've sold out the first show, we've made what we thought we were going to make, I'll ask the artist to play a second show at Revolver, no fee. We resource it, we market it for free, and 100% of the door goes to the Fred Hollows Foundation. So we started doing these shows, and like a lot of the artists were kind enough to give up their time, and the shows really started to catch fire. So pretty much every show we were doing, we were raising 20 or 30 grand. So I did that for about like 3 or 4 years. And we'd raised like, you know, 200 or 300 grand at that stage. And Fred Hollows, they thought this was amazing because there's the money side, but also people who tend to follow a charity when they're young follow it the whole way through their lives. So they were getting all these young people going, what's Fred Hollows? And starting to follow them as a charity, you know. And then in 2015, I decided, like, you know, I'd come out of a relationship and I just decided for some reason I had more time on my hands. I always had this itch I wanted to scratch about doing an Ironman, and I'd never even run a marathon at the time. So I was like, I signed up to do this this Ironman in Perth. And when you signed up, it said you can raise money for a charity, and Fred Hollows was one of the charities. So I was like, that's a good tie-in. And I thought I'll throw a link up and see how I get on. And I put a link up saying, look, I'm going to be doing Bustle and Ironman, and I'm going to support Fred Hollows. And I was blown away, Danny, by how much like support I got. Like people, like so many people came out of the woodwork and donated, to the point where I was like, fuck, I'm feeling a lot of pressure to finish this thing. Cause like, you know, I'd had so much in donations. Anyway, I completed it. And the following year, one of my good mates, Ollie, he decided to do an Ironman, similar circumstance. I said, Ollie, throw up a link for Fred Hollows, you'll be surprised. And he was like, you reckon? Loads of people supported him. So then the year after that, we got together and we said, it'd be good to do something different. Like, we don't want to do another Ironman, but it'd be good to do something. So we found out there was this event down the coast called Coast Trek, and it was a 60K. You could walk or run or trek it specifically for Fred Hollows. And the deal was you had to have a team of 4, and 50% of the team had to be female. So we got 2 of our female friends, and we signed up, and we started, you know, like documenting our story online. And, you know, we came to do the 60K run and got really well supported. The following year, like loads of people, quite a few people had messaged me saying, hey, are you going to do that thing again? Like, I'm in if you're in. So the second year we had 2 teams of 4. Then the third year, it really caught fire, and I ended up putting a thing up saying, guys, a few people have hit me up about this. We're going to do it again. And I ended up with 6 teams of 4. So that third year, we had people like Benson, Torrin, you know, DJs with like good profile, and they were all telling their story online, recording them training, and then raising money and stuff. And then year 4 was 2020. Again, I put a thing up saying, we're going to do this event again, raise money for Fred Hollows. Anybody wants to be part of it, send me a message. And I woke up the next day and had 120 messages in my inbox, and I was just like, whoa. So I started training everybody, like this massive group, and then COVID kicked in, and the event was supposed to be on in May. And then it got postponed and moved to August because, you know, lockdown, we thought we were going to be out at that stage. So during the lockdowns, this big group of 120 people, everybody kind of found themselves, because you were allowed to exercise with one person. So everybody was like teaming up in pairs and going out and doing their exercise. And we had all these WhatsApp groups and everybody was like supporting each other and getting fit. The clubs were closed, so everybody was like super healthy. People were dropping their diet tips. And all of a sudden, this group of 120 like trash bags became this super fit, group. And then it came to August and the event got cancelled again because of COVID. And a guy I was friends with at Port Phillip Council just goes, hey, bring the event down here, just run your own event. And I was like, mate, I don't know anything about running marathons, running an event. And he's like, dude, it's the same as a music event. Instead of a stage, you've got a start-stop line. Instead of a bar, you've got drink stations. You still need a permit. You still need first aid. And I was just like, yeah, all right. So we managed to get a permit to run the first Quickest Thieves down in from Riva in St Kilda. Piero was a massive help in that. And we raised like 250 or 300 grand the first year. And then the second year, we did it like the 120 grew to 200. It was exactly double, 240. And we raised like 500 or 600 grand. And then the third year, like went to nearly 500 people and we raised like another 700. So yeah, it was a great project to be a part of, great to be able to give back. I went to Cambodia myself at one point with the Fred Hollows team and witnessed firsthand the work that they do. And it was like, I wish I could let everybody experience what I saw on the operating tables in Cambodia. Cause like people are completely blind. And this operation that takes minutes, you come back the next day and they take the eye patch off and they've got perfect vision. It's actually unbelievable, So yeah, I've had to put a pause on that just for now because as you know, I've just had a kid. And it's very Quickest Thieves was very time consuming, but yeah, I'll get back to it at some stage.
It's a crazy thing. Like, I don't think anyone worldwide has basically got that many DJs, promoters, and club heads moving or even outdoors during the day unless there's a fucking event on. You convinced myself to do one. I did a 21K. I thought I was going to die. And the second one, I came in and I was a part of the water station, but I was giving out wet pussy shots.
That's right. I remember there was a guy on the second one, the one you were at with the wet pussy shots, who had he came up and this was 4 months later. I was in Sydney at a show and this guy comes up to me and I recognized him. And because that year we had 250 or 300 people, I didn't know everyone. And he was like, hey, Mike, do you remember me? And I was like, I remember your face. And he was like, I'm Kyle. I did Quickest Thieves. And I was like, oh, how did it go for you? And he goes, there's not a word of a lie, Danny. He goes, mate, I got to about fucking 37, 38K and I literally passed out. He was like, I was done. I had nothing left. And this dude came over and gave me 2 shots of wet pussy. And he's like, it was like Red Bull. He said, like, I got up and I literally sprinted the last 5K. And I was like, I know who that is.
There's plenty of people who needed to pep up and wet pussy's got them to the finish line. Yeah. Not normally a marathon though. Yeah. You do things a lot differently. This is my last question for today. You do things a lot differently. Obviously like getting that many people to get fit. You've done Ironmans. You've traveled around the world doing exciting stuff. You've done hypnotist. You were a hypnotist for a little bit. Hypnotherapist for a little bit. But I think you don't get credit for is that before you did this journey, you were still doing this because I've known you a long time. Yeah. I remember you were down at the hospital volunteering your time. You weren't posting it. I don't think people would even know about it. So I just wanted to sort of say, like, what was the motivation for you before you did all this other stuff to get involved in those things and also do all the crazy things you've done in life? Because you've done a lot of crazy things. Yeah.
I think, Danny, like, I've been very lucky in that, like, I've traveled a fair bit in places like South America and Asia. And when you spend time in those countries, you realize we are, like, Australians live in the top 2% of the world. Like that is the standard of living. And there's not a day goes by, I don't think, like, we are so blessed and so gifted with, like, our, health service and the amenities we have here and all that. And I just genuinely, to the day I die, I feel I'll always have a duty to give back. And it was never about, I didn't post about working in the hospital because, like, I wasn't doing it for any kind of recognition. I just wanted to be able to once a week give back my time to be able to do something for other people, and like the hospital needs volunteers. And yeah, like it's just one of those things. I think do you know, like, I didn't find this out till a lot further into my volunteering journey, but volunteers are statistically happier people than the general population. And like, there's something in that. Like, I always say to people, if you're feeling down or you're having a bad day, go and do something for someone else. Like, it genuinely probably might make you feel better. But I just feel like, we live in such a gifted society, and Australia's like, you know, like when I hear people complaining about Australia, I just want to like shake them, because it's like, it is the best country in the world, probably standard of living wise. And I just feel, you know, you've got a duty to give back. There's plenty of people need help.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Mike, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for being someone to look up to, because in our industry, there's a lot of people who we should not be looking up to, but you've always been someone who's like pushed the boundaries with the sort of the intention of being good. Yeah. There's not a lot of people, for myself or others in the industry, but you've got people through depression into marathons, like guys we know who we're talking about. And then on top of that, you've always gone above and beyond in things when it comes to health, mental health, you know, hearing people's journeys, helping people. I know when I originally did touring, you taught me with no problem. There was no questions asked. It was like, no, you sat down and you told me exactly how to do it. So I want to say thank you for, I guess, mentoring,
Cheers, bro.
mentoring well.
Man, like you've helped me with heaps of stuff as well. You know, I mean, when I was first starting out, like, you know, probably as a promoter, me being like, you guys had like this huge crew, you and Kyle, and me being able to like kind of tag along to you guys. It worked both ways, bro. You know, like it was, it was mutually beneficial.
So still for me, having someone like you that works in our industry that we're able to look up to has been a blessing. And, you know, I think you've motivated so many people to do things that they didn't think was possible. And you've basically shown that you can live a really kind of prosperous life, but also healthy and, you know, with very good intentions. But like, even the way that you don't drink alcohol now, all these other things too, like these are things that people didn't think were possible in our industry. So thank you for being sort of, I guess, like the founding father of fucking making it corporate and whatever you want to call it. But I just wanted to like kind of give you your roses because I think you deserve it. So
all right, cheers. Thanks, Danny. And yeah, thanks for having me on, bro. It's always a pleasure.
Likewise, dude. Thank you so much for coming down.
All right, cheers.